The war between humans and the Xyrathia had raged for years. Neither side trusted the other, and every battle seemed to feed the fire of hatred. Humans thought of the Xyrathi as cruel conquerors who looked down on all other species. The Xyrathi saw humans as reckless, stubborn, and dangerous. Many soldiers had died on both sides. Damned in peace looked like a dream too far to reach. Ethan Cole never expected to be caught alive. He was a lieutenant in the Earth Alliance, young but already hardened by war. He had led a scouting mission into enemy space, only for his ship to be shot down. His crew was dead. His weapons were gone. When he finally woke, he found himself in a place he had never thought he would see, the royal palace of the Xyrathi Empire. The palace was strange and beautiful. Its walls were alive with glowing lines like veins of light running across smooth stone. Alien guards stood tall and silent, their armor shining like metal and crystal mixed together. Ethan was marched down long halls where alien nobles stared at him as though he were an animal dragged in from the wild. His wrists were bound, his uniform torn, his body bruised from the crash. At the end of the hall, great doors opened, and Ethan was pushed forward into a throne room that stole his breath. The ceiling stretched high like the sky itself painted. With stars that shifted as if alive, a throne of silver and black crystal sat at the far end. Upon it rested the most feared ruler in the galaxy, the Queen of the Xyrathi. She was tall, graceful, and terrifying. Her skin carried a faint shimmer, her hair flowing like strands of dark metal. Her eyes glowed faintly blue, sharp and unyielding, yet strangely curious. The weight of her presence made Ethan's heart pound. He had heard of her, the queen who never showed mercy to her enemies, the one who crushed rebellions with a single command. The guards forced Ethan to kneel. He clenched his teeth, refusing to bow his head. He was a soldier of Earth, and if this was the end, he would not die in shame. The room fell silent, all eyes on him. The queen rose slowly from her throne, her steps measured, her gaze locked on the human before her. When she spoke, her voice was calm but filled with authority. "You are Ethan Cole of the Earth Alliance." Ethan lifted his chin. "I am." "You led a mission into my territory," she continued, her tone sharp. "Your ship was destroyed. Your people are dead. And now you stand here, a prisoner." Ethan's fists tightened. "Then kill me and be done with it. I won't beg." A ripple of murmurs passed through the court. No one had spoken to the queen like that before. The guards tensed, ready to strike him down at her command. But instead, the queen studied him in silence. Finally, she spoke words that made the entire chamber freeze. "I will not kill you, human. Instead, you will marry me." Ethan's mind went blank. He stared at her, thinking he had misheard. The nobles around them gasped, some even stepping back in shock. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. "What?" Ethan breathed, his voice barely more than a whisper. The queen's expression did not change. "You heard me. Marry me, or face execution." His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. Was this some kind of trick? Some cruel joke before? The blade fell, queen of an alien empire, demanding marriage from a captured human soldier. The silence in the throne room was unbearable. Ethan forced himself to speak. "Why me? You have your own kind. Your nobles, your warriors." "Why would you enough?" She cut him off, her eyes flashing like lightning. "I have given my command. You will accept, or you will die." The nobles erupted in whispers. Some looked outraged, others confused. Ethan felt the weight of every gaze on him, wanted to fight back, to tell her he would never bend, but his body trembled. It faced death before, but this was different. Execution meant nothing but an end. Marriage meant a fate unknown, but it was still life. Queen stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. "Decide, human. Here and now." Ethan's throat was dry. His soldier's pride told him to refuse. His survival instinct screamed at him to accept. His mind raced with questions. Why him? What did she gain from this? What trap was waiting? He thought of his fallen crew, of the oath he had sworn to survive if he could. He thought of Earth, far away, still fighting. If he died here, his life would mean nothing. But if he lived, maybe he could learn why she wanted this. Maybe he could turn it into something useful. At last his voice came low and heavy. If the choice is death or marriage, then I accept. The throne room shook with the shock of the court. Some nobles shouted in protest. Others watched with fascination. The guards looked uncertain. The queen's lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but something close. Wise. Ethan's body felt weak, as though the very air had been stolen from his lungs. He could hardly believe the words that had left his mouth. He was a soldier of Earth, sworn to fight the Xyrathi, and now he had just agreed to marry their queen. The queen turned back to her throne, her voice carrying across the chamber. Prepare the union. Tonight. Gasps and murmurs followed, but no one dared argue. Her will was law. The guards lifted Ethan roughly to his feet, pulling him back as the queen sat once more on her throne. His heart raced, his mind reeling. Tonight. A marriage between a human soldier and the ruler of the enemy empire? He had no idea what fate awaited him, but one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. As he was dragged from the throne room, Ethan looked back at the queen. Her glowing eyes followed him, calm and unreadable. For the first time since his capture, he felt something stronger than fear. It was not hope. Not yet. It was the sense that his story was only beginning. He had no choice. He had to survive. And to survive, he would have to stand beside the most powerful alien in the galaxy. The queen's shocking demand had left him breathless, and now his future rested on a path he could not yet see. Ethan could not sleep that night. They had placed him in a chamber unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls glowed faintly with shifting light, as if stars had been trapped inside crystal. Strange symbols hovered in the air, drifting like mist. The floor was soft beneath his boots, alive in a way that unsettled him. He was alone, yet he felt the weight of unseen eyes. He paced the room, his thoughts spinning. Marriage. The word did not feel real. He was a soldier of Earth, trained for war, trained to kill if he had to, not trained to be a husband, especially not to an alien queen. He thought of the crew he had lost, of the mission that had failed, of his promise to fight for humanity. And yet here he was, forced into something that seemed like a nightmare, dressed as a dream. He did not know what the queen wanted from him. Power, a symbol, a puppet, or something else he could not understand. Her demand had been cold, her tone sharp, but there had been something in her eyes when she looked at him, something that made him feel as though he was not just a prisoner. He wished he could read her mind, but her expression remained carved. In stone, hours passed before the door opened. Alien guards stepped in, their armor glowing with faint blue light. One spoke in a voice that carried no warmth. The ceremony will begin soon. You will be prepared. Ethan wanted to resist too, shout, to fight, but he forced himself to stay calm. Survival meant patience. If he refused, he would die. If he played along, he might find a way to understand why the queen had chosen him. He might even find a way to escape one day. The guards led him to a chamber filled with flowing fabrics and strange scents. Alien attendants moved around him quickly, draping him in garments that shimmered like liquid metal. They adjusted the fit with sharp precision, never speaking a word. Ethan stood still, feeling like a weapon being polished before being placed on display. When he finally looked in the mirror of silver glass, he barely recognized himself. The ragged soldier was gone. In his place stood a figure dressed like royalty, though the hardness in his eyes had not changed. The attendants left without explanation. The guards returned and led him once more through long halls, their steps echoing against stone that seemed alive. Every turn reminded him he was deep inside the heart of the Empire, surrounded by enemies who wanted him dead. At last, the doors opened, and Ethan was guided into the throne hall once more. But this time, the room was transformed. Towers of glowing crystal rose on both sides, their light bathing the chamber in shifting colors. Hundreds of alien nobles stood in silence, their faces proud, suspicious, or even openly hostile. At the far end, the queen waited. She was no less terrifying. But tonight she was adorned with a crown of black crystal and flowing robes that shimmered with stars. Her eyes met his across the room, unreadable yet heavy with meaning. Ethan's breath caught in his chest. The ceremony began with chants in the alien tongue. The voices of the nobles rose and fell, filling the hall with sound that seemed to shake the walls. Ethan could not understand the words, but he felt their weight. He walked forward slowly, each step echoing like thunder. When he reached the queen, he stopped, standing just a step below her. She raised her hand, and the hall fell, silent. Her voice carried across the chamber. This union is not tradition. It is not comfort. It is survival. The human stands beside me, not as a slave, not as a prisoner, but as my chosen consort. Let the Empire witness, and let no one forget. The words sent shock through the crowd. Ethan felt eyes burning into him, judging him, rejecting him. Wanted to speak, to say something, but the weight of silence kept him frozen. The queen extended her hand toward him, her eyes locked on his. For a moment Ethan hesitated, his heart pounded. This was the moment. A soldier of Earth about to bind himself to the queen of his enemies. Every part of him screamed against it, but survival had only one path. Slowly he placed his hand in hers. The hall erupted with sound. The nobles spoke, some shouting in anger, others murmuring in disbelief. The queen held his hand firmly, as if daring anyone to challenge her choice. A priest-like figure stepped forward, carrying a crystal sphere that pulsed with light. He spoke. Words Ethan could not understand, then held the sphere between them. The queen pressed her palm against it, and the light grew brighter. Ethan followed, pressing his hand against the other side. The sphere flared, sending a wave of energy through the room. Ethan felt a jolt run up his arm as though the light had pierced into his very blood. For a moment, he thought he saw vision stars burning, worlds colliding, a shadow rising in the distance. Then the light faded, leaving only silence. "Is done," the queen said. The chamber shook with voices, but no one dared step forward. The guard stood firm, and the queen's gaze silenced even her loudest critics. She turned to Ethan, her voice softer, yet still filled with command. "Are mine now, Ethan Cole, and I am yours?" He could not answer. His throat was dry, his mind spinning. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the moment passed too quickly. The queen released his hand and turned back toward her throne. The feast began soon after. Long tables, filled with alien food, stretched across the hall. Nobles sat in clusters, their eyes never straying far from the human who now stood at the queen's side. Ethan did not sit easily. He felt like prey surrounded by predators. The queen sat tall, eating calmly, while attendants placed strange dishes before him. He forced himself to taste the food. Some was sweet, some bitter, some unlike anything he had ever known. But he kept his expression calm, refusing to give his watchers the satisfaction of seeing him falter. Halfway through the feast, a sound broke through the hall. Faint hiss, almost too quiet to notice. Ethan's soldier's instinct flared. He scanned the table, the shadows, the walls.
And he saw
it, a small dart, glinting in the light, flying toward the queen. Without thinking, Ethan moved. He shoved her back and raised his arm. The dart struck his sleeve, grazing his skin before clattering to the floor. The guards shouted, rushing to secure the hall. The queen stood quickly, her eyes wide, staring at Ethan. He breathed hard, feeling the sting of the graze, but kept his stance firm. He looked at her, and for the first time, he thought he saw surprise in her eyes. Not fear, not anger, surprise. The hall descended into chaos as guards hunted for the assassin. Nobles shouted, demanding answers, some accusing others of treachery. But the queen's gaze remained on Ethan. Slowly she stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "You saved me," she said softly, almost to herself. Ethan met her gaze, his voice steady. "If I die, I die. But if you die, this whole union means nothing. I don't know what game you're playing, but I won't stand by while someone takes you down." The queen's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something close. "You are different." Right. Before Ethan could reply, the guards returned, dragging a figure in chains. An alien noble, one of her rivals, was thrown onto the floor. The queen's expression turned cold as ice. She gave a single command, and the guards dragged the traitor away. The feast resumed, though the air was thick with unease. Ethan sat back, down, his arm throbbing from the graze. He could feel the queen's eyes on him, studying him as if she were seeing him for the first time. For the first time since he had arrived in this place, he felt something shift. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was something more. The night ended with the queen leading him from the hall. She said nothing as they walked, her steps silent, her presence heavy. At last, when they reached a private chamber, she turned to him. "Do not think this union will be easy," she said, her eyes glowing in the dim light. "The court will fight it. The empire will test you. And I will not protect you from what comes." Ethan met her gaze, his jaw set. "I didn't expect you to. I'm still alive, aren't I?" "That's enough for now." For a long moment, she studied him. Then, without another word, she turned and entered the chamber. Leaving him at the door, Ethan stood in silence, his heart pounding. He did not know if he had just saved his life or bound himself even tighter to a fate he could not escape. All he knew was that the path ahead was darker and more dangerous than ever. But deep inside, a spark had been lit. A strange bond had formed, one neither of them could yet understand. And so the human soldier, once a prisoner, now stood as the queen's consort with enemies on all sides and a future clouded in shadows. Ethan woke with a start the next morning, though he was not sure if he had even slept at all. The chamber where he had been placed was quiet, but he felt the silence carried weight. He sat on the edge of the bed, his mind running through the events of the night before. The ceremony, the strange bond formed by the glowing crystal, the feast, the assassination attempt. Every moment seemed unreal, like a story told by someone else. Yet the sting on his arm where the dart had grazed him was real enough to remind him it had all happened. The doors to his chamber opened, and two alien guards stepped inside. They did not speak, but their eyes told him everything. He was not being asked. He was being summoned. Ethan stood slowly, his jaw tight, and followed. Them they led him down long corridors filled with whispering nobles. Wherever he walked, eyes followed. Some were filled with disgust, others with suspicion, and a few with curiosity. He felt like a weapon displayed in enemy hands, dangerous and unwanted. At last he was taken into a smaller chamber lit by pale blue fire. The queen sat at a long table, scrolls and glowing tablets before her. She did not rise when he entered, but her eyes flicked toward him. Those eyes, cold, yet alive with a hidden fire, seemed to strip him of any armor he tried to wear. "Sit," she said. Ethan sat across from her, his back straight. He said nothing at first, waiting. The queen studied him for a long moment. Then she spoke. "You prevented my death yesterday. Few would have acted so quickly. Even fewer would have risked themselves for me. Do you know what the nobles now whisper?" Ethan shook his head. "Don't need to know their gossip. They whisper that you did it not out of loyalty, but out of desperation," she said. "That you want to prove yourself useful, so I do not discard you." He frowned. "Is that what you believe?" The queen leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp. "I believe you are a soldier. A soldier does not waste movements. You acted because you saw no other choice. Perhaps survival guided your hand, or perhaps something else." Ethan held her eyes steady. "I didn't do it for them. I didn't even do it for you. I did it because I won't stand by while someone is struck down, no matter who they are. That's not how I was trained." The queen studied him, silent for a long moment. Then, faintly, she nodded. "Perhaps that is what makes you dangerous." Before he could answer, the doors burst open. An armored figure strode inside, tall and broad, his silver plating gleaming. His face bore the ridges of noble blood, and his eyes burned with fury. Bowed quickly to the queen, then turned his gaze to Ethan. "My queen," the noble said, his voice sharp, "this cannot continue. A human, a creature of war, standing at your side as consort, it is an insult to our empire. Ethan clenched his fists but said nothing. The queen's voice remained calm. Prince Varric, you speak boldly. I speak truth, Varric said, his eyes never leaving Ethan. Your people whisper of weakness, or your throne trembles because of this choice. Allow me to prove what he truly is. Ethan understood the challenge before the words came. I call for combat, Varric declared. Let me face the human. Let me show the Empire what kind of mate you have chosen. The chamber fell silent. The queen leaned back, her gaze unreadable. You know the law. A duel to first blood may be called when honor is questioned. Varric smirked. Then I call it. Unless, of course, the human is too fragile to face me. Ethan's jaw tightened. His body was still sore from the crash, his muscles stiff, but his pride would not let him refuse. He met Varric's eyes and said evenly, I accept. The queen's gaze flicked between the two. So be it. Tonight, in the arena. The guards escorted Varric out, but not before he cast Ethan a look filled with hatred and promise. Back in his chair, exhaling slowly, You are a fool, the queen said at last. Maybe, Ethan admitted, but if I refused, you'd have lost face. And if I'm going to be stuck here, I'm not going to crawl on my knees for them. For the first time, the queen's lips curved faintly, almost like the ghost of a smile. At least you understand the weight of pride. That may serve you well, if you survive. The rest of the day passed slowly. Ethan was led to the training yards, where alien soldiers watched him with mocking curiosity. They placed weapons before him, strange blades, staffs that sparked with energy, curved swords made of glowing stone. Ethan tested each one, feeling their weight, their balance. They were not human weapons, but he adapted quickly. He had trained for years, and though the designs were alien, the principles of combat were the same. As night fell, the arena filled. Nobles gathered in high seats, their robes glowing with symbols of their houses. The common people filled the outer rings, shouting and cheering. The arena itself was a wide circle of stone etched with runes that glowed faintly in the dark. Ethan stood on one side, gripping the curved blade he had chosen. On the other side, Prince Varric entered, his armor gleaming, his weapon a staff crackling with arcs of light. The queen sat high above, her gaze steady on the arena. The signal was given. Varrock moved first, his strikes fast and heavy, the staff crackling with energy as it cut through the air. Ethan barely dodged the first blow, the air around it burning his skin. He rolled aside, came up quick, and slashed with his blade. Varric blocked easily, the crackling energy pushing Ethan back. The crowd roared. Ethan kept his breath steady. He had faced larger foes before. He would not win by strength. He had to outthink him. Varric pressed the attack, each strike heavier than the last. Ethan gave ground, studying his rhythm, his stance. Every warrior had patterns. Every weapon had weaknesses. He just had to survive long enough to find them. A strike came low. Ethan stepped aside, his blade snapping up to deflect. Sparks flew. The energy burned his hand, but he held firm. He ducked another swing, then darted forward, slashing quick across Varric's arm. First blood, the arena gasped.
I'll walk with marking.
The glowing runes on the floor pulsed, marking the end.
Bounce.
Ethan stepped back, breathing hard, his blade still raised. Varric stared at the thin line of blood on his arm, disbelief burning in his eyes. He roared in fury, raising his staff again, but guards rushed in, halting him. The duel was over. The queen rose from her throne. Her voice carried over the stunned silence. The human has proven himself. Let no one question my choice again. Nobles bowed, some reluctantly, others with clenched jaws. The crowd murmured, torn between awe and anger. Ethan lowered his blade, his chest heaving. His body ached, his skin burned, but he had stood his ground. I had not only survived, he had won. Later, as he was escorted back to his chamber, he felt the queen's gaze follow him. When he passed beneath her throne, she leaned down just enough for him to hear. You are still alive, she said softly. Perhaps there is more to you than even I thought. Ethan met her eyes. I told you before I won't crawl. 4. The first time, the queen did not hide her smile. It was faint, sharp, but real. Then let us see how far you can stand. That night, Ethan lay awake, his body aching, but his spirit burning. He had faced death again and walked away. He had stood before an empire that wanted him gone and proved himself in their own arena. But he knew it was only the beginning. The nobles would not forgive. Enemies would not forget. The queen, she was still a mystery, her reasons hidden, her heart locked away, yet something had changed. It was no longer just a prisoner. It was no longer just a symbol. He was becoming something more, though he did not yet understand what. As the lights of the alien city glowed outside his window, Ethan whispered to himself, one step at a time. Survive, stand, endure. And somewhere deep inside, he felt the strange bond between himself and the queen grow stronger, like a spark waiting to become fire. The sun of the Zirathi capital rose pale and strange, casting soft blue light across the crystal towers of the palace. Ethan woke early, the events of the duel still fresh in his mind. He had survived the night, earned a grudging respect from the court, and proven himself in battle. But even victory had brought no comfort. The nobles whispered in hidden corners, their eyes following him wherever he went. Every glance reminded him that many wanted to see him fail, to see him die. The queen summoned him again to the private chambers. She sat behind a desk of black crystal, reviewing glowing tablets filled with symbols and words Ethan could not read. She looked up as he entered, her gaze sharp, appraising him in silence. "Stand at attention," she said finally. Ethan obeyed, stiff and alert. "There is unrest," she began, her voice steady but heavy. "The nobles may appear respectful, but many of them conspire. I can feel it in their words, in the way they move. They question my decisions. And you, human, are at the center of their doubts." Ethan nodded. "Then what do you want me to do?" The queen's eyes narrowed. "Watch, learn, survive, and when the time comes, act." She rose and gestured for him to follow. They walked. Through halls lined with moving light, corridors that seemed to shift subtly as if the palace itself was alive. They reached the council chamber, where nobles gathered to discuss matters of state. The queen did not enter with them, but stood just outside the doors, watching silently. Ethan observed the nobles closely. Some nodded as she passed, others scowled. A few cast sidelong glances at him, their expressions open with suspicion. Felt the weight of their judgment, but he held his stance. He had survived the duel. He would not flinch now. The council meeting began with discussion of trade, defense, and other matters. Ethan studied every word, every gesture, every movement. Of the nobles, slowly, a pattern emerged. Certain nobles seemed to coordinate, subtle signals passing between them, a flick of a hand. Glance toward a crystal, a shift in seating. Something was planned. After the council, the queen motioned for him to stay close. "We see what?" "I mean," she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "They're plotting. Some kind of coup, maybe. But it's subtle." The queen studied him, her expression unreadable. Most humans would not notice. Most would be too focused on survival or too proud to see the threat. But you see patterns. You are dangerous in ways they cannot understand. For the first time, Ethan felt a small sense of pride. He was not just a pawn, could play a part and maybe even influence the outcome. The days that followed were tense. Ethan trained relentlessly, both to sharpen his skills and to demonstrate his value. The nobles continued to murmur, some testing him with challenges, others attempting to trap him with subtle tricks. He learned quickly, adapting to the strange environment, learning the alien customs. The flow of conversation, the meaning behind gestures and symbols. Slowly, he began to win small victories. He corrected missteps in strategy, advised the queen on matters of diplomacy, and used his knowledge of human warfare to offer solutions the nobles could not anticipate. With each success, his confidence grew. The queen's attention remained on him. One evening, while the palace slept under the glow of distant stars, the queen summoned him to the garden terraces. The air was cool, filled with the scent of alien blooms that shifted colors with the wind. She walked silently beside him, her eyes on the horizon, but not seeing the city. You have changed, she said finally. Not just in skill, but in presence. The court respects action. They cannot ignore it. But there is more at stake than appearances. There are those who will stop at nothing to take my throne, human. And you are in the middle of it all. Ethan kept his gaze forward. Then tell me what to do. If you trust me enough to stand by your side, I will do it. The queen turned to him, her glowing eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. Do not fully trust you. Not yet. Trust must be earned, as you have begun to understand. But I believe in your potential. You see things others cannot. You think in ways my people are not accustomed to. That is why I have kept you close. Shh. Words struck him. She had placed him at the center of her empire's greatest risk. And yet, she had chosen to share the burden, even partially. Ethan felt a strange honor, mixed with fear. He had no choice but to rise to the challenge. Days later, the warning came. A whisper from an ally of the queen, a guard loyal to her through decades of service, told Ethan of a secret meeting, held in the shadows beneath the palace, where nobles plotted openly to overthrow the queen. They planned to assassinate her during the next public event, blaming the human consort for failing. To protect her, Ethan felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. This was no longer about survival alone. It was about protecting the woman who had demanded his loyalty, who had chosen him in front of the entire empire. He informed the queen quietly, watching her reaction closely. She did not flinch. Instead, she nodded, her gaze calculating. So, she said softly, "You are my shield as well as my sword." Very well, we act together, and we act carefully. The following days were a test of patience and cunning. Ethan and the queen observed, learning the movements of their enemies. They studied the patterns of guards, the conversations of nobles, the subtle shifts in alliances. Every smile, every gesture could conceal betrayal. Ethan grew skilled in reading alien behavior. He noticed the smallest cues, the tightening of a jaw, the hesitation before answering, the flicker of light in the eyes. He shared his observations with the queen, who considered each carefully, nodding at times. Raising an eyebrow at others, slowly a partnership formed. The queen began to rely on him not just for protection, but for counsel. She asked questions, listened to his thoughts, and sometimes challenged his assumptions. He was no longer just her consort in name. He was her ally, her strategist, and increasingly, her confidant. Their bond grew quietly, without ceremony or declaration. It was built on mutual respect, shared danger, and the understanding that the palace itself was a battlefield more dangerous than any war zone he had known. Ethan began to see the queen, not as a ruler apart from him, but as a person burdened with impossible responsibility, forced to make decisions that could destroy or save her people. And she began to see him not as a human pawn, but as someone capable, clever, and courageous. Then the night of the coup arrived. The palace was quiet, the halls empty of all but guards. The nobles had chosen their moment, hoping the queen would be isolated. Ethan stood at her side, his senses alert. Every shadow could conceal a dagger. Every footstep could be the signal of betrayal. Suddenly, movement in the corridor, a group of armored nobles rushing toward the queen's chambers. Ethan drew his blade, alerting the queen. She remained calm, her own weapon appearing in her hand as though it had always been part of her. The battle was swift and brutal. Ethan fought beside the queen, blocking attacks, striking decisively, protecting her as the palace echoed with shouts and clashing weapons. He moved with purpose, anticipating the enemy's strategies, turning their own confidence against them. Together, they reached the heart of the threat, cornering the lead conspirator. Ethan's blade pressed against the noble's chest, while the queen's hand shimmered with alien energy, ready to strike if necessary. The conspirator yielded, trembling. The coup had failed. The palace was saved, and the queen's throne remained secure. In the aftermath, the queen looked at Ethan, her expression softening. "You have done more than survive," she said quietly. "You have protected not just me, but the empire. Few could have done what you did tonight." Ethan's chest heaved. I only did what I had to do. I didn't want to see you fall." The queen's gaze lingered on him, a mixture of pride, curiosity, and something harder to name. "You are different, human. You see the world in ways my people cannot? Perhaps that is why I chose you. Perhaps that is why you are still alive." For the first time, Ethan felt a strange warmth, a bond that went beyond duty or survival. Had entered this world as a captive, a pawn in a game he did not understand, but through trust, courage, and quick thinking, he had proven himself not only to the queen, but to the empire itself. As the night settled over the palace, Ethan and the queen stood together on the terrace, looking out over the glowing city. He no longer felt like a prisoner, felt like a partner, though the road ahead was still uncertain. For the first time, he realized that survival was no longer enough. He would fight not just to live, but to protect, to prove, and perhaps to belong. And somewhere in the quiet between them, the queen seemed to understand that too. The palace, once a place of danger and intrigue, had become the center of a new alliance. Ethan's life was still full of uncertainty, but the trust between human and queen had begun. And in the heart of the Zirathi Empire, that trust would become the spark that changed everything. The palace was quiet in the early hours, but Ethan could feel tension lingering like a shadow in every corridor. Even though the coup had failed, the threat to the queen and the empire had not vanished entirely. Some nobles had been captured, but others had fled, plotting from the shadows. Ethan walked beside the queen, alert to every sound, every movement. Their partnership, born of necessity and tested by survival, grown stronger with each day. The queen moved with calm confidence, yet Ethan sensed the weight of her thoughts. He had learned to read the subtle shifts in her posture, the slight tightening of her jaw, the brief pause before she spoke. "They are regrouping," she said quietly, her eyes scanning the palace grounds. "Some will not forgive their failure. They will strike again, perhaps tonight." Ethan nodded, his hand brushing against the hilt of his blade. "Then we strike first. Let them see that any treachery will fail before it even begins." She studied him for a moment. "You're growing bold, human. Perhaps too bold. But I will allow it. Tonight we end this?" The night fell thick and dark, but the palace glowed with faint light from the crystal towers. Ethan and the queen moved silently through secret passages, navigating corridors that only a few trusted guards knew. Their plan was simple, yet dangerous. Intercept the fleeing conspirators before they could rally forces and strike elsewhere. In the Empire. Ethan's heart pounded as they approached the first chamber where they had been reported. The queen held her hand up, signaling him to stop. He could hear whispers and hurried steps within. Ethan counted silently for, maybe, 5 nobles attempting to regroup, unaware of the 2 who had tracked them. With a subtle nod from the queen, they moved as one. Ethan struck first, blocking the doorway to prevent escape. The queen stepped forward, her presence radiating authority and lethal precision. The nobles hesitated, realizing too late that they had walked into a trap. Ethan's blade moved with controlled power. He did not kill unnecessarily, but struck hard enough to disable. Within moments, 2 of the nobles lay groaning on the floor, their weapons clattering away. The queen's energy pulsed, a faint shimmer of alien power that forced the others to kneel in submission. "You underestimated us," she said calmly, her eyes locked on the lead conspirator. "And you will pay for it with your freedom taken and revoked from your rights to interfere in my empire ever again." The nobles bowed quickly, terror in their faces. Ethan felt a strange surge of satisfaction. He had learned to fight alongside her, to anticipate threats, and to act with precision. He realized that the queen had chosen him not only because he was a human, but because he could adapt, survive, and protect her when others could not. After securing the conspirators, they moved swiftly to other parts of the palace. Each encounter was met with skill and control. Ethan marveled at the queen's command. She did not need to shout orders. Her presence alone directed the battle. Together, they moved like 2 parts of a single entity, each covering the other, each anticipating moves before they were made. Hours later, the palace was secure. The last conspirators had been captured, their plans foiled, and the nobles who remained were forced to swear renewed loyalty. Ethan and the Queen stood in the throne room, surveying the space that had once been tense with danger. "You have done well," she said, her voice softer now, almost like a whisper meant only for him. "Tonight you did not just fight. You protected me, the Empire, and yourself. Few humans could have achieved what you have." Ethan lowered his blade, breathing heavily. "I only did what had to be done. I'm not here for glory, only to survive and to help when I can." The Queen studied him for a long moment. Her gaze softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw something more in her eyes, trust, and perhaps something like admiration. "You are more than survival," she said quietly. "You are my consort, my partner, and now my equal in this moment." Ethan blinked. He had never imagined such words from an alien queen whose power and authority dwarfed his own. In her gaze, he saw sincerity. He realized that their bond had grown beyond necessity, beyond duty. It had become something real, something unspoken but undeniable. Days passed and the Empire began to stabilize. Ethan's presence, once resented by many, became respected. Nobles who had doubted him now watched him cautiously, realizing that the human soldier who had survived duels, battles, and court intrigue was a force to be reckoned with. The Queen and Ethan spent time together, planning, training, and observing the Empire. Their conversations moved from strategy to stories about Earth, about the Xyrathi, about the strange similarities between soldiers. Regardless of species, Ethan found himself laughing at her dry humor, marveling at her intelligence, and respecting her decisions even more. She, in turn, seemed to enjoy his presence, his resilience, and his courage. One evening, as they walked along the palace terraces, overlooking the glowing city, the Queen spoke softly. "You have changed the course of my empire, human, perhaps. Not in ways you understand, but your presence has shifted the balance. I am grateful." Ethan looked at her, unsure how to respond. "I only did what I could. You chose me, and I followed the path you set before me. I didn't know if I could succeed, but I had to try." The Queen stopped walking, her glowing eyes meeting his. "And succeed you did. It's not through strength alone, but through understanding, courage, and heart." Ethan's chest tightened. He had never expected to be recognized for more than skill or survival. To hear her speak of courage and heart coming from someone so powerful was humbling. "Thank you," he said quietly. The Queen's gaze lingered. "The Empire still watches. Your role is not finished. But for tonight, we may rest in peace." The stars of the Xyrathi sky shimmered above. Ethan felt a sense of calm he had never known. The path had been treacherous, the battles unending, and the dangers immense. But for the first time, he felt not like a pawn, not like a prisoner, but like a partner, someone who had earned his place beside the Queen. In the days that followed, peace began to settle over the Empire. Nobles learned to respect the human consort, though some still whispered in secret. Ethan continued to train, to observe, and to protect. He had become more than a soldier. He had become a figure of trust, a bridge between human and Xyrathia, a symbol of courage in an uncertain world, and the Queen, once isolated in her power, began to rely on him not just as protector, but as advisor, companion, and confidant. Their bond, forged through danger and trust, had grown unbreakable. One evening, in the quiet of the palace gardens, the Queen turned to him. "Ethan, you could have chosen any path. You could have left, returned to Earth, or sought freedom. You stayed. Why?" Ethan looked out at the horizon, the glow of the alien city reflecting in his eyes. "Because I realized something. Life is more than survival. It's about standing with those worth fighting for. And I see that in you." The Queen studied him, her expression softening. And for the first time in the long war between humans and Xyrathi, she smiled fully. "Then perhaps we were meant to find each other in this chaos. Perhaps this union, this choice. It was never about obedience. It was about understanding, trust, and the strength to face the future together." Ethan nodded. "Then we face." together. As the city lights shimmered beneath them and the alien stars shone above, human and queen stood side by side. They had fought battles, survived betrayal, and faced death. They had formed a bond forged in fire, trust, and courage. And though the future remained uncertain, one truth was clear. Together, they were stronger than any threat, any enemy, or any challenge the galaxy could throw at them. In the heart of the Xyrithi Empire, a human soldier had become more than a consort. He had become a symbol proof that courage, loyalty, and understanding could bridge even the widest gaps between species. And the queen, once alone in her power, had found someone who could stand beside her, equal in spirit and unwavering in resolve. Their story, born of war, danger, and impossible choices, had become one of hope, unity, and the promise of a future. Shaped not by fear, but by trust. Together, human and queen, they would face whatever came next, unyielding, fearless, and unbroken.